There is something happening inside you right now that science has been quietly wrestling with for over a century. Not quietly in the sense of hiding it. Quietly in the sense that the implications of what has been found are so genuinely strange, so profoundly at odds with the conventional picture of what you are and what reality is, that even the scientists who discovered it have struggled to know what to do with it, what to say about it publicly, how to communicate findings that are mathematically certain but philosophically unresolvable without sounding like they have abandoned the careful empiricism that made the discoveries possible in the first place. This is not a conspiracy. Nobody suppressed these findings. They are in the peer-reviewed literature. They are taught in graduate physics programs. They are discussed openly among the scientists who work with them every day, but they are rarely explained to ordinary people in ways that connect the mathematics to the actual lived experience of being a conscious human being, moving through a world that quantum mechanics keeps insisting is far stranger than it appears. That is what tonight is about, not secrets, not suppressed knowledge, but genuine, documented, rigorously established scientific findings about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to physical reality, explained honestly, in full, with their actual implications intact rather than smoothed over for comfort. By the time this is over, you will understand something about your own awareness, about the nature of the consciousness reading these words right now that most people never encounter in a form they can actually use. Welcome to Quantaverse. There was a woman named Sandra who worked in a field that had nothing to do with quantum physics. She was a graphic designer. She spent her days thinking about color and space and the way the eye moves across a page. She was good at her work. She was precise and creative in equal measure, and she found genuine satisfaction in the specific problem-solving that good design requires. She had never thought much about consciousness as a subject. It was not something her life had given her a particular reason to think about. She was conscious, obviously, self-evidently, in the way that everyone is conscious without having to think about what that means, and that had always been sufficient. And then one afternoon, she was working on a project that required her to research the science of color perception, how the eye processes light, how the brain converts electromagnetic radiation of specific wavelengths into the experience of seeing red or blue or gold. And in the middle of that research, she encountered a question that stopped her completely. The question was not in the research she was reading. It was a question that the research raised without answering. She had read that the eye detects light of certain wavelengths and sends signals to the brain, which processes those signals and produces the experience of color. And she found herself asking, but where exactly does the experience happen? The eye detects, the brain processes, but the actual felt quality of seeing red, this specific, irreducible, purely subjective experience of redness. Where does that occur? In which neuron? In which part of the brain? At which point in the processing does the physical signal become the felt experience? She searched for the answer. She read more. She went deeper into the neuroscience of perception, and what she found documented clearly in the scientific literature, not hidden, not suppressed, but not widely discussed outside academic philosophy of mind, was that nobody knows. Not because the research hasn't been thorough enough, but because the question of how physical processes in the brain produce subjective experience is genuinely, fundamentally, as of this moment, unsolved. This is called the hard problem of consciousness, and it is the door through which everything else in this video enters. There was also a woman named Kimberly who had thought about consciousness a great deal. She was a philosophy graduate student who had spent years reading the arguments and the counter-arguments and the responses to the counter-arguments in one of the most contested areas of contemporary philosophy. She knew the hard problem intimately, had read David Chalmers, who named it, had read Daniel Dennett, who argued it was not as hard as it appeared, had read the responses to Dennett from people who thought he had explained away the very thing that needed explaining rather than actually explaining it. She was comfortable with the uncertainty of it, the way it resisted resolution, the way the smartest people in the field kept arriving at genuinely different conclusions, not because some of them were missing information, but because the question itself seemed to resist the kind of resolution that most questions eventually yield to. What Kimberly had not fully connected until a conversation with a physicist colleague changed her understanding of everything was the relationship between the hard problem of consciousness and the findings of quantum mechanics. She had kept those two bodies of knowledge in separate compartments of her mind. The hard problem was philosophy. Quantum mechanics was physics. They were different disciplines with different methodologies and different questions. And then her colleague said something that collapsed the compartments entirely. He said, "You know that the measurement problem in quantum mechanics and the hard problem of consciousness might be the same problem." And Kimberly put down her coffee and said, "Say that again. Let us build the foundation carefully, because what follows requires understanding several things clearly before their connection becomes visible. The first thing to understand is quantum superposition. At the quantum level, at the level of the particles that compose every atom of every object, including every atom of your own body, physical systems do not have definite properties before they are measured. An electron does not have a definite position. It exists in a superposition of all possible positions simultaneously, described mathematically by what physicists call a wave function, a probability distribution across all the possible states the system could be in. This is not a statement about our ignorance. It is not that the electron has a definite position and we just do not know what it is. The electron genuinely does not have a definite position until measurement occurs. The wave function is not a description of our uncertainty. It is a description of the actual physical state of the system. This has been confirmed experimentally with extraordinary precision across decades of research. It is one of the most solid empirical findings in the history of science. The second thing to understand is what happens at measurement. When a quantum system in superposition interacts with a measuring device, the superposition appears to collapse. The wave function goes from describing a spread of possibilities to describing one specific actual outcome. The electron that was everywhere at once is now here. Specifically, definitely, measurably here. This transition from superposition to definite state is called wave function collapse. And here is the problem that has occupied physicists and philosophers since the earliest days of quantum mechanics. What causes the collapse? What is it about measurement that produces this transition from possibility to actuality. This is the measurement problem, and it is genuinely unsolved. Not because physicists haven't thought hard enough about it, but because every proposed solution to it either introduces new problems or requires assumptions about the nature of reality that go far beyond what the mathematics strictly requires. Sandra found the hard problem and could not stop thinking about it. She kept returning to it in the gaps of her working day, during the time between finishing one design and starting the next, during her commute, during the 20 minutes before sleep when her mind was active but her body was committed to stillness. She was not trying to solve it. She had read enough to understand that people far more equipped than her had been unable to solve it. She was just thinking about it, turning it over, sitting with the genuine strangeness of it. The fact that you could describe in complete detail every physical process involved in the perception of a color, every photon, every retinal cell, every neural signal, every cortical activation, and still not have explained the one thing that seemed most obviously in need of explanation: the redness of red, the felt quality, the subjective experience, the thing it is like from the inside to see that specific color rather than just to process that specific wavelength. She thought about this and felt something that she later described as vertigo. Not unpleasant vertigo, the specific disorienting sensation of standing at the edge of something genuinely large, of encountering a question that opened rather than closed the world. That made reality feel less settled than it had seemed before the question arrived. She mentioned this to a friend who was a scientist, and the friend said, "You should read about the observer effect in quantum mechanics." And Sandra said, "What does that have to do with consciousness?" And the friend said, "That is exactly the right question. The observer effect is one of the most misunderstood concepts in popular discussions of quantum mechanics. So let us be precise about what it actually says and what it does not. Say what it says is this: in quantum mechanics, the act of measurement, the interaction between a quantum system and a measuring device, changes the state of the system. Before measurement, the system is in superposition. After measurement, it is in a definite state. The measurement changes what is measured. This is not a statement about the clumsiness of measuring instruments disturbing delicate systems. It is a fundamental feature of quantum mechanics that has no classical analog. The measurement does not reveal a pre-existing definite state. It participates in producing the definite state. Now here is where it gets genuinely contested and genuinely important. What counts as measurement? What kind of interaction with a quantum system causes the wave function to collapse? In the early interpretations of quantum mechanics, particularly in the work of John von Neumann and later Eugene Wigner, there was serious, mathematically grounded argument for the position that the collapse requires a conscious observer, not just a physical measuring device, not just any interaction between quantum systems, a conscious mind. The argument was not mystical, it was mathematical. Von Neumann showed that if you try to describe the measuring device itself in quantum mechanical terms, if you treat the detector as a quantum system rather than a classical one, the superposition simply propagates. The detector becomes entangled with the measured system and is now in a superposition of having detected this and having detected that. You can extend this analysis indefinitely to the detector, to the laboratory, to everything that interacts with the original system, and the superposition keeps propagating rather than collapsing. The only place where the chain of reasoning seemed to terminate, the only place where von Neumann could identify a principled stopping point for the infinite regress, was at conscious experience, at the point where a human mind actually observes a definite outcome. And he argued that this is where the collapse actually occurs. Kimberly had read von Neumann. She had read Wigner's extension of the argument. She had read the critiques, the physicists who found the consciousness causes collapse interpretation unacceptable and proposed alternatives. Decoherence theory, many worlds interpretation, objective collapse models, pilot wave theory. She knew the landscape of proposed solutions to the measurement problem, and she knew that none of them had achieved universal acceptance. Each solved some problems and introduced others. Each required assumptions that some physicists found acceptable and others found worse than the problem being solved. What she had not fully appreciated until the conversation with her physicist colleague was that the measurement problem and the hard problem of consciousness were not just analogous. They might be two aspects of the same underlying puzzle. The hard problem asks how physical processes produce subjective experience. The measurement problem asks what role subjective experience plays in producing definite physical outcomes. They are pointing at each other. The hard problem says something strange is happening at the boundary between physical processes and conscious experience, something we cannot explain in purely physical terms. The measurement problem says something strange is happening at the boundary between quantum possibility and definite actuality, something that might involve conscious experience in a way we do not fully understand. What if these are the same boundary? What if the place where physical processes become conscious experience and the place where quantum possibility becomes definite reality are not two different places but one? What if consciousness and quantum mechanics are both pointing at the same gap in our understanding of what reality actually is at its most fundamental level? Here is a question I want you to sit with right now, not to answer definitively, just to hold. If the act of conscious observation is genuinely implicated in the transition from quantum possibility to definite actuality, if awareness participates in the construction of what is, real rather than simply recording what is already there, what does that say about the nature of your experience right now? Not in a vague metaphorical sense, in a specific, literal, physically grounded sense. You are a conscious observer. You are made of quantum systems. The quantum systems composing you are constantly interacting with the quantum systems composing the world around you. And quantum mechanics keeps insisting, through its mathematics, through its experimental results, through a century of the most rigorous empirical investigation ever conducted, that observation is not passive, that the observer is not separate from the observed, that awareness and physical reality are connected at a level more fundamental than ordinary experience suggests. What does that mean for who you are? What does that mean for what your consciousness actually is? I am not going to give you a clean answer to that question. Nobody can. It is genuinely open, but I want you to feel the weight of the question, to let it sit in your awareness as something real and unresolved rather than something to be quickly categorized and moved past. because the questions that sit with you unresolved, the ones that keep returning, the ones that resist easy closure, are often the ones doing the most important work. Sandra went down a long path after her initial encounter with the hard problem and the observer effect. She read everything she could find that was written for non-specialists. She watched lectures. She listened to conversations between physicists and philosophers, and she kept encountering the same tension, the same productive, unresolved, genuinely important tension between two views of consciousness that have not yet been reconciled. The first view, the conventional view, the one that most neuroscientists work from, is that consciousness is produced by the brain, that it is an emergent property of sufficiently complex neural processing, that when you understand the brain well enough, you will understand consciousness completely. This view is called physicalism or materialism. Consciousness is physical. It is what complex physical systems do under certain conditions. The second view, less mainstream but represented by serious scientists and philosophers, is that consciousness cannot be fully explained in terms of physical processes because something is left out of every purely physical explanation: the felt quality of experience, the subjective inside, the what it is like. This view in its various forms argues that consciousness is either fundamental, a basic feature of reality like mass or charge, or that it requires an expansion of our concept of the physical that goes beyond current neuroscience. The tension between these views is not resolved, and quantum mechanics sits right in the middle of it, because quantum mechanics is the most fundamental physical theory we have, and quantum mechanics keeps producing results that physicalism struggles to accommodate without remainder. The observer, the collapse, the role of measurement, the entanglement, the non-locality. Physics keeps pointing past itself towards something it cannot fully contain within its own framework, and that something keeps looking like consciousness. Kimberly eventually wrote her dissertation on the relationship between the measurement problem and the hard problem of consciousness. It was not a popular dissertation among the more conventional members of her committee, but it was a rigorous one. She was careful to distinguish between what was established and what was speculative, between what quantum mechanics actually demonstrates and what various interpretations of quantum mechanics propose, between the hard problem as a genuine philosophical puzzle and various proposed solutions that she examined carefully and found wanting in specific ways she could articulate precisely. What she argued, carefully with full acknowledgement of the uncertainty involved, was this: the standard approach of treating consciousness as something to be explained by physical science and treating quantum mechanics as a physical theory that does not essentially involve consciousness is becoming increasingly difficult to sustain, not impossible, but increasingly difficult. The measurement problem and the hard problem keep pointing at each other in ways that suggest they may need to be addressed together rather than separately, and any genuinely complete theory of reality will eventually need to account for both, for what consciousness is and for what role it plays in the quantum mechanical processes that constitute the most fundamental level of physical reality. She defended this position carefully. She did not claim to have solved either problem. She claimed that the relationship between them was underexplored and that exploring it carefully was philosophically productive. Her committee passed her. Some of them remained unconvinced. All of them agreed the argument was rigorous, and Kimberly walked out of her dissertation defense, feeling something she had not expected to feel, not triumph, clarity, the specific, grounded, genuinely earned clarity of someone who has looked honestly at a very hard question for a very long time and arrived at a position they can defend without pretending the uncertainty is resolved. Let us talk about what this actually means for you, because this is Quantaverse, and everything we explore here, however deep into the science and philosophy it goes, comes back to something practical, something that changes how you move through your actual life. Here is the practical implication of everything we have covered so far, stated as directly as possible. Your consciousness is not a passive recording device. It is not a mirror that reflects a fixed external reality without participating in it. The science, genuinely, rigorously, based on what quantum mechanics actually demonstrates, suggests that awareness is active. That observation participates in the construction of what is definite and real, rather than simply documenting what was already there. And if that is true, even partially, even in ways that are not yet fully understood, then the quality of your awareness matters in ways that go beyond the psychological, beyond the self-help, beyond the motivational. The quality of your observation, what you attend to, how you attend to it, the depth and clarity and honesty of your awareness in any given moment is not just a psychological variable affecting your mood and your interpretations. It may be a physically significant variable affecting something more fundamental than that. This does not mean you can think your way to any outcome through force of will. The relationship between quantum mechanics and human scale experience is complex and not fully understood, and anyone who tells you otherwise is overstating what the science actually supports. But it does mean that the ancient human intuition found across cultures, across centuries, across radically different philosophical and spiritual traditions, that consciousness is not a bystander in the universe. That awareness participates in reality rather than merely witnessing it, that the observer and the observed are connected at a level more fundamental than ordinary experience suggests. That intuition has more scientific support than most people realize. Not proof, not certainty, but genuine, serious, mathematically grounded scientific support. And that is worth knowing, worth sitting with, worth allowing to change something about how you understand what you are and what your awareness does. Sandra came to a specific realization after several months of following this thread of inquiry. She was sitting at her desk working on a design, fully absorbed in the problem, the way she got when the work was going well, and she noticed something. She noticed that the quality of her attention changed the quality of what she was seeing, not in a mystical sense, in a practical, observable, immediately verifiable sense. When she looked at a design with tired, distracted, going through the motions attention, she saw certain things and missed others. When she looked at the same design with the kind of clear, fully present, genuinely engaged attention that came when she was at her best, when something about the problem had captured her completely, she saw different things. More accurately, the attention was not passive. It was participatory. It was doing something to the act of seeing, making certain things visible that the other quality of attention left invisible. She had known this practically for years. Every experienced designer knows that fresh eyes see differently than tired ones. But she had never thought about it in terms of what quantum mechanics was suggesting about the relationship between observation and reality. And when she made that connection, when she linked the practical experience of participatory attention to the scientific framework, suggesting that observation is genuinely active at the most fundamental level, something shifted in how she understood her own awareness. She was not just a person who looked at things. She was a conscious observer in a universe where conscious observation participates in the practical experience of participatory attention to the scientific framework, suggesting that observation is genuinely active at the most fundamental level. Something shifted in how she understood her own awareness. She was not just a person who looked at things. She was a conscious observer in a universe where conscious observation participates in the production of definite reality. And the quality of her observation, the depth and clarity and genuine presence of her awareness, mattered in ways that extended beyond the practical outcomes of her work. Kimberly had a different version of the same realization. Hers came through the philosophy rather than through the practice. She had been thinking about the implications of the view she had defended in her dissertation, that consciousness and quantum mechanics need to be addressed together. And she kept returning to one specific implication that she found both unsettling and liberating in equal measure. If consciousness is genuinely implicated in the quantum mechanical processes that constitute physical reality, if awareness participates in the transition from possibility to actuality at the most fundamental level, then consciousness is not a late comer to the universe. It is not something that appeared billions of years after the Big Bang, when matter happened to organize itself into sufficiently complex structures. It is not an afterthought, not an epiphenomenon, not something reality does on the side while the real business of physics carries on without it. It is present at the foundation, woven into the structure of what is real from the beginning, not in the sense of a personal God or a guiding intelligence or any of the specific theological concepts that word consciousness might evoke, but in the sense of something genuinely fundamental, something the universe cannot be described completely without, and that the recognition that awareness is not a footnote to reality, but an essential feature of it, changed how Kimberly understood her own existence, not in a way she could fully articulate, but in a way that was real and lasting, and that showed up in the small things and how she paid attention and what she took seriously. In the quality of presence she brought to ordinary moments that she had previously moved through without much awareness of their significance. Here is something I want to address directly because it comes up whenever these ideas are discussed seriously. The concern that connecting quantum mechanics to consciousness is pseudoscience, that it is a misuse of legitimate physics to support mystical or spiritual claims that the physics does not actually support. This concern is legitimate and important. There is a real phenomenon, sometimes called quantum mysticism, where genuine quantum mechanical concepts are borrowed and misapplied to support claims that have no real connection to what quantum mechanics actually demonstrates. Consciousness causes quantum collapse, therefore positive thinking creates reality. Quantum entanglement means everything is connected, therefore psychic phenomena are real. These are not valid arguments. They misuse real physics to support conclusions the physics does not support. What I have described in this video is different from that. I have been careful to distinguish between what quantum mechanics actually demonstrates, the observer effect, the measurement problem, the genuine unresolved questions about the role of observation in wave function collapse, and what is speculative or contested. The relationship between the measurement problem and the hard problem of consciousness is a genuine area of philosophical and scientific inquiry pursued by credentialed researchers publishing in peer-reviewed journals. The question of whether consciousness is fundamental to reality is a genuine philosophical question with serious defenders on multiple sides. These are not fringe ideas. They are contested ideas, which is different. And the honest engagement with contested ideas, taking them seriously without overclaiming, exploring them without pretending the uncertainty is resolved, is exactly what Quantaverse is for. Sandra and Kimberly met at a lecture on the philosophy of mind at a university neither of them attended. Sandra had seen the event listed online and gone out of curiosity. Kimberly was there because the speaker was someone whose work she had engaged with in her dissertation. They ended up sitting next to each other. They ended up talking afterward for 2 hours in a coffee shop around the corner from the lecture hall. What struck both of them about the conversation, what they both mentioned afterward when they described it to other people, was the specific quality of genuine, mutual understanding that happens when two people are thinking carefully about the same hard question from different angles, and neither of them is pretending to have an answer they don't have. Sandra brought the practical, experiential designer's perspective, the way attention participates in seeing, the way the quality of awareness changes what is visible, the way consciousness felt active rather than passive in her actual experience of working and seeing and being in the world. Kimberly brought the philosophical and scientific framework, the hard problem, the measurement problem, the serious academic engagement with the question of whether these two unsolved problems might be related aspects of a single deeper puzzle. Together they were articulating something that neither of them had been able to articulate alone. Not a solution, not a resolved answer, but a clearer formulation of the question. A more precise understanding of what was actually being asked when you asked what consciousness is and what role it plays in physical reality, and a shared sense, grounded in genuine engagement with the science and philosophy rather than in wishful thinking, that the answer to that question, whatever it turns out to be, is going to change something important about how humanity understands itself. Let me tell you what I think the most practically important takeaway from everything we have covered tonight actually is. Not the most philosophically interesting, not the most scientifically significant, the most practically important. Here it is: the quality of your awareness in any given moment is not a trivial thing. It is not a minor psychological variable affecting only your subjective mood. The depth of your attention, the genuineness of your presence, the clarity and honesty of your observation of your own experience and the world around you, these things matter at a level that goes beyond the immediately obvious. Whether or not consciousness participates in quantum mechanical processes in the specific ways that von Neumann and Wigner proposed, and that remains genuinely uncertain, the broader point is supported by everything from quantum mechanics to neuroscience to the practical experience of every person who has ever paid careful attention to the difference between moving through life consciously and moving through it on autopilot. Conscious, genuine, quality attention produces different results than distracted, automatic, surface-level attention. Not just different feelings, different actual outcomes, different things seen, different connections made, different possibilities noticed, different realities in a practical, experiential sense, constructed from the same available information. You are not a passive observer of a fixed external reality. You are a conscious participant in a world that is, at the most fundamental physical level and at every practical experiential level, responsive to the quality of your observation. And that is worth taking seriously, worth building a life around, worth the ongoing, daily, sometimes difficult practice of bringing genuine awareness to your experience rather than moving through it unconsciously. Because whatever the ultimate answer to the hard problem of consciousness turns out to be, whatever quantum mechanics eventually tells you about the relationship between awareness and physical reality, this much is already clear. The quality of your consciousness matters more than most people realize, more than conventional education teaches, more than the distracted, stimulation-saturated, attention-fragmenting modern world makes it easy to appreciate. Your awareness is not a spectator. It is a participant, and participating consciously, genuinely, deeply, with real presence and real attention is the most important thing you can do with the extraordinary fact of being aware at all. Sandra still works as a graphic designer. She is better at it now than she was before she encountered the hard problem of consciousness and the observer effect and the measurement problem and all the other genuinely strange findings that quantum mechanics and philosophy of mind have been generating for a century. Not because knowing about those things makes her technically more skilled, but because she brings a different quality of attention to her work, a more conscious participation in the act of seeing, a genuine, grounded, scientifically informed appreciation for the fact that her observation is not passive, that what she attends to shapes what she sees, that the quality of her awareness is a real variable with real effects on real outcomes. She does not think about quantum mechanics consciously while she works, but something has changed in her relationship with her own attention that the engagement with these ideas produced. A greater seriousness about the quality of her presence, a less casual relationship with the extraordinary fact of being a conscious observer in a universe where observation turns out to be more significant than it appears. Kimberly is still in academia. She is working on a book, the expansion of her dissertation into something longer and more accessible than an academic thesis. She wants to write for the Sandra who sat in her apartment Googling the hard problem of consciousness after an afternoon of designing and could not find a clear, honest, rigorous explanation of why the question was so hard and what it connected to. She wants to write for the person who is not a philosopher or a physicist, but who has encountered these ideas and found them genuinely important, and who deserves a serious engagement with them that does not talk down to them or oversimplify in ways that misrepresent what the science actually says. She does not know if consciousness causes quantum collapse. Nobody does. She does not know whether the hard problem will ultimately be resolved within a physicalist framework or whether it will require something more. Nobody does. What she knows, what she is, certain of with the specific certainty that comes from years of careful engagement with a hard question, is that the question matters, that it is one of the most important questions available, that the answer to it will change something fundamental about how humanity understands itself, and that engaging with it honestly, with genuine rigor and genuine openness and genuine willingness to sit with uncertainty rather than reaching for premature closure is one of the most valuable things a person can do with their intellectual life. Here is your question for the comments, and I want you to think about it carefully before you answer. Not the philosophical version of the question, the personal version, in your own experience, in the actual lived texture of your daily life. Have you ever noticed the difference between moving through an experience consciously and moving through the same kind of experience on autopilot? Have you ever noticed that genuine, full, present attention produces a qualitatively different experience than distracted, automatic surface level attention? Not just a different feeling, a different reality, different things visible, different connections possible, different outcomes accessible. Tell me about it in the comments, because I think the practical, experiential recognition of what conscious participation actually does compared to unconscious automation is the most important data point available in the personal exploration of what quantum mechanics and philosophy of mind are pointing toward at the theoretical level. The science is asking what consciousness is. Your experience is answering, moment by moment, attention by attention, what consciousness does. And what it does, it turns out, is everything. You are a conscious observer in a universe where conscious observation matters more than the conventional picture of reality suggests. Not in a magical sense, not in a sense that bypasses the genuine complexity of what quantum mechanics actually demonstrates and what remains genuinely uncertain, but in a real, grounded, scientifically informed sense that connects the most rigorous physics ever developed to the most intimate fact of your existence. You are aware, and your awareness, the specific, irreducible, genuinely mysterious fact of your subjective experience, is not a footnote to reality. It is woven into the structure of it, at the quantum level and at every practical level above it. The quality of your observation participates in the construction of what you experience as real. The depth of your attention shapes what is visible and what remains hidden. The genuineness of your presence in any given moment is not a psychological nicety. It is a physically significant variable in a universe where the observer and the observed are not as separate as they appear. Take that seriously, not as a license to overclaim what the science supports, but as a genuine, warranted, scientifically grounded reason to invest in the quality of your own awareness, to treat your consciousness not as a passive recording device, but as an active participant, to show up for your own experience with the seriousness and the depth of attention that the extraordinary fact of being conscious at all actually deserves. This is Quantaverse. Once awareness begins, nothing ever looks the same again. Now I want to stay with you a little longer, because what we have covered so far, as deep as it goes, is still the surface of something even more significant. And I do not want to leave you at the surface when there is more available. Let us go further. There is a concept in quantum mechanics called entanglement, and it is perhaps the strangest, most experimentally robust, most philosophically significant finding that physics has produced in its entire history. Here's what entanglement says. When two quantum particles interact, they can become entangled, and once entangled, they are connected in a way that persists regardless of the distance between them. When you measure the state of one entangled particle, the other particle instantaneously takes on a correlated state, regardless of whether the particles are in the same laboratory or on opposite sides of the universe. This is not a theoretical prediction waiting to be confirmed. It has been experimentally verified repeatedly with increasing precision and over increasing distances. The physicist John Bell proved mathematically in 1964 that no theory based on local hidden variables, no theory that explains the correlations between entangled particles by reference to pre-existing properties they carry with them, can reproduce the predictions of quantum mechanics. And the experiments that followed Bell's theorem confirmed that quantum mechanics is right. The correlations between entangled particles are real. They are instantaneous across any distance, and they cannot be explained by any classical mechanism. Einstein called entanglement spooky action at a distance. He found it deeply troubling and spent years trying to find an alternative to it. The alternatives failed. The spooky action is real, and what it tells us about the nature of reality, about separateness, about locality, about the relationship between parts and wholes in a quantum universe, is something that nobody has fully absorbed yet, including the physicists who work with it every day. Because what entanglement implies is that the universe is not fundamentally composed of separate, independent, locally interacting parts. At the quantum level, at the most fundamental level of physical reality, separateness is not the basic fact. Connectedness is. The particles that appear separate are not truly separate in the way that classical physics assumed. They retain connections across space that have no classical analog. The universe is more like a single entangled system than like a collection of independent parts that interact locally. And that fact, genuinely experimentally established, not metaphorical or speculative, changes something about what it means to be a conscious observer embedded in it. Sandra thought about entanglement for a long time after she learned about it. She thought about it in the context of her own experience, the way certain interactions with certain people felt like they were happening at a level deeper than the exchange of words and gestures, the way some connections felt constitutive in a way others did not. She was careful not to jump to conclusions. She knew that quantum entanglement operates at the subatomic level and that the relationship between quantum phenomena and human-scale experience is not simple or direct. She was not claiming that human relationships are literally quantum entangled in the technical sense, but she was noticing something, that the picture of reality as fundamentally composed of separate, independent parts, the picture that classical physics had given and that most people still operate from implicitly, was not the picture that quantum mechanics was painting, and that if the more accurate picture was one of fundamental connectedness rather than fundamental separateness, then the quality of her relationships, the depth of her attention to the people around her, the genuineness of her presence in the connections she had, mattered in ways that the conventional picture did not capture. Not because human relationships are quantum entangled in a technical sense, but because the universe that contains human relationships is quantum entangled at its foundation, and living in a universe whose foundation is connectedness rather than separateness, genuinely, physically, not metaphorically, is a different thing than living in a universe whose foundation is separateness with occasional local interactions. It changes something about what it means to be here, to be conscious, to be in relationship with others and with the world. Kimberly thought about entanglement in the context of the hard problem. She had always found physicalist accounts of consciousness, accounts that try to explain everything about consciousness in purely physical terms, unsatisfying for a specific reason. They treated the conscious observer as essentially separate from the world being observed, a brain and a body processing signals from an external environment. The observer over here and the observed over there, with information passing between them, but the two remaining fundamentally distinct. Entanglement complicated this picture in a way she found philosophically significant, because if the quantum mechanical description of reality is correct, if entanglement is real and non-local and not explainable by any local hidden variable theory, then the separateness of observer and observed is not a fundamental feature of reality. It is an approximation, a useful one, an approximation that works well at human scales and classical conditions, but not the deepest truth about what is happening. And if the deepest truth involves connectedness at the foundation, if the boundary between the observer and the observed is not as sharp as it appears, then the hard problem of consciousness might look different when examined in that context. Not solved, but differently situated. The mystery of how physical processes produce subjective experience might be connected to the mystery of how entangled particles maintain their correlations across space. Both might be pointing at the same underlying fact about reality, that the separation we experience between things is not the most fundamental truth about them, that at the deepest level the universe is more unified than it appears, and that consciousness, the most intimate, most undeniable, most irreducibly present fact of subjective experience, might be not separate from that unity but an expression of it. Here's what I want to leave you with. Not a conclusion, not a resolved answer. Something better than that, a set of questions that are worth carrying, questions that are scientifically grounded and philosophically serious and that connect the most rigorous physics ever developed to the most intimate facts of your own existence. What is your consciousness? Not what produces it, not what correlates with it in the brain, but what is it actually, fundamentally in itself? What is the nature of the awareness that is reading these words right now? What is the relationship between that awareness and the quantum mechanical processes that constitute the physical reality you are observing? Is consciousness something that reality produces or something that participates in producing reality? Is the hard problem a problem to be solved within our current understanding of the physical, or a signal that our current understanding needs to expand? What does entanglement tell us about the separateness we take for granted between ourselves and others, between the observer and the observed, between consciousness and the world it inhabits? These questions do not have clean answers. They are not going to have clean answers anytime soon, but they are real questions, scientifically serious, philosophically important, personally significant in a way that goes beyond the intellectual, because how you answer them, or how you hold them, since holding without answering is often the most honest, available response, shapes something about how you understand what you are and what your presence in the world actually means. You are a conscious observer in a quantum universe. Your awareness participates in something more significant than the conventional picture of reality suggests, and the quality of your consciousness, the depth of your attention, the genuineness of your presence, the honesty of your observation of your own experience matters at a level that connects the most fundamental physics to the most ordinary moments of your daily life. This is Quantaverse. Keep questioning, keep observing, keep going deeper, because once awareness begins, nothing ever looks the same again.